Welcome to the Optimalist podcast, where we examine just what it takes to ensure humans flourish in the age of AI. I'm Sarah, your host through this exploration of mindfulness, attention, focus, and motivation, all elements of human flourishing. So how do we cultivate them? This week, I am joined by psychotherapist and performance coach Tara Miller. Tara brings together over a decade of experience in clinical practice and trauma therapy for all ages, with the neuroscience of advanced level self-regulation therapy training to write, speak, present, and coach on nervous system strategies for resilience. Listen as Tara and I discuss metacognitive functions, the work of creating your own identity, and, of course, the nervous system. We're so glad you're here for today's conversation.
I hate that I'm an expert on grief and loss, but I am well practiced in this process. Mm-hmm. And I mean, grief's a funny thing, and loss, it envelops the whole room. It tags everybody in to come play. It tags your past. It tags your future, and then the moment of whatever your emotions are. So it's very organic and biological and very physical. So to go through it, I just don't stifle any of it. I don't try and restrain it. I don't try and negotiate it with it. I just sit in my body and feel it and go through the waves of it and know that from my past, it does get better. The waves start to settle. But honoring the depth of love that you have for a person, or in this case, a pet, is I would never want to shortchange myself of that, even though it's painful. So right. I've really been in my body and I'm listening to it, and I'm tired. So I'm resting, and I took some days off, and I'm just kind of very, very present. And I think animals are so great at reminding us of how to be present, that I'm kind of channeling my dog. Like, how would he go through day and appreciate nature and appreciate the time that we had. And it's been very, very soothing for me to just slow the pace down. And I think we should do that in any high stress, overwhelming, traumatic situation, is slow the pace down, listen to what your physical body is asking of you, and just give yourself the time to honor that process. So that's been my last 4 days.
I love that you're saying that animals bring us into the present, especially dogs. It's something that when I have 2 older dogs as well. And one of them in particular, when I got her, she's 13, I guess. And I had her when she was about 4 or 5 months, and never having had a dog before of my own. And being that she was so young, I took it, and she's a hunting dog, and I really took it to myself to become an expert in, like, how do you train a dog to, I got her to hike and be very independent with me, and I wanted her to be off leash and all these things. And it was like really learning that connection of, they are there for you. Like, they wouldn't be there in your, everything in their life revolves around what you're doing in this moment.
That's right.
And like, there is nothing. And we wonder, like, we get annoyed at like living in like a modern home environment with them, and like they bark when you leave, or they do this when you don't want them to. And it's like, it's because their whole world is present with what you're doing at this moment. And like, you have to really alter yourself to that, rather than always thinking that they should be altering to you. And I think that's really humbling when you're training a dog, because it's supposed to teach you about that.
Well, and we are animals, and they are animals. They respond to our nervous system and our energy first and most. And so we can learn a lot about ourselves from how our dogs are behaving. And I think when you're a dog owner and you dive into learning about the breed of that dog and what it needs, what it's going to take to thrive, it teaches us about how we can connect with other people, how we connect with ourselves and our own needs. It's such a collaborative process. We have life with the dog that we learn and can apply to anything else. And I think that's why there's such a loss too, because especially like pandemic and then post-pandemic and working from home, I spent more time with that dog in 10 years of his life than really anybody.
I know.
So
I have the same feeling. Yeah.
And the vacancy of his energy and his joy and all of the best things of life that he showed up with every day so effortlessly. It's such a lesson in like, oh, I wish I could be more like my dog was, but also what a void that leaves in this space for sure.
Yes. And they only want, I don't mean to say only as if it's nothing, but they only want your attention. And that also makes me think about when she was a puppy, when my Scout was a puppy and she was the first dog, and I'm learning even about like little things like walking and like equipment and learning that the leash, just what you were saying about the behavior and the connection between the human and the animal, that the people don't realize the way you hold your leash is directly affecting the behavior of the dog as they walk. And so if you are anxious and stressed and you are putting tension on that leash, like it immediately goes, you could have the calmest dog in the world, but if you are feeling whatever you're feeling is running through that line from you to them, they're gonna act appropriately. So I do think 100%. That it's so, oh my gosh, it's so worth it to put in the effort to learn about that, especially if you're getting a dog that needs extra care. But you did mention at the beginning of this starting conversation about being an expert in grief and related topics. And I'm wondering if that is something that you have always, like, has that always been your path, or is that a more recent expertise? Or regardless of the answer to that, what has influenced your path as to what you are focused on right now in your work?
I think the grief expert label that I won't want to wear like a sign.
Probably stumbled into it at some point. I
stumbled into it. I remember traumatic deaths early on in my adolescence with friends, and then as in life, you experience death. And for me, the expertise of really huge loss occurred once when my ex-husband committed suicide, and then 3 years later when really the love of my life died in a motorcycle accident. So there was back-to-back very profound losses and a life of raising kids on my own. And it was just this extreme test of resilience.
Wow.
And in moving through some of that and a couple of car accidents and a couple of other things that happened, I just discovered this really, I had to dive in and tap into the deepest level of human survival resiliency that I could find. And, in the darkness of our lives, sometimes that's where we discover that we do have more in the tank, and we have more to survive the travesties of our life. So from there, and recovering and moving through those traumatic experiences and those difficult times of life, I fell into self-regulation therapy, which then ended up becoming a career as I shifted gears, became a counselor, got my master's degree, and then trained in self-regulation therapy, which was all about regulating the nervous system so that you can recover from events in your life and come back down to a real healthy baseline so that you can do it again, because life has a way of throwing stuff at us. So it was kind of that turn midlife that moved me into a different path, and over 10 years of clinical work helping other people through their traumas.
And when you work with people, I know you do work with educators directly or with students directly. What is the
So I did both. I ran groups for girls on resiliency in elementary and middle schools for a while. Early on in my career, I worked with the Elizabeth Fry Society and worked with kids that had been victims of sexual assault. And then when the pandemic hit, I shut down my private practice. I didn't want to do clinical work like that anymore, the hour to hour, however many people you could see in a day, because I knew that going forward, it was all going to be pandemic trauma for a really long time. and I was going through it myself and helping my family through it. So I shifted gears and moved into more of a consultant role and into a speaker, educator role. And in and during the pandemic, when teachers were really, they were really going through it, and the masking and all of the drama and trauma that happened in the middle of it, I did some educational series and webinars for some of the teaching groups, for the support staff and the teachers, for how to manage their own nervous systems, how to really find ways to settle and calm so that they could impact the people that they work with and the students coming in, and how they could be really a safe, calm, supportive space while they supported each other going through that. So that's where the transition moved as far as frontline workers and teachers during that time, which I continue to do alongside other basically leaders in any industry.
So I guess that kind of combines the question I was going to ask before. That kind of makes it a little bit more clear. But in your work with teachers and students, or anyone in the education system really during the pandemic time or coming out of the pandemic, are you finding, because I know you're mentioning a lot of working with people on nervous system regulation when it comes to trauma, but are you finding that you could uncover that people's baseline is pretty low to begin with, trauma or not? I'm not sure if that's something that you could really navigate being in the middle of all of this, but what's your assessment there?
I would say higher baseline, which means lower resilience. It means you're already cooking in a fight or flight state to some degree. And I think that became such a chronic state that teachers were in and had to be in as they went day in and out through all of that. And it's a profession that's so demanding anyway, emotionally and mentally, and does require some nervous system support and some really good lifestyle management regardless. So, and there's a high burnout percentage for this profession. So high demand, high burnout. They're already at a higher baseline, most of them, because of the chronicity of the environment that they work in. And I think the pandemic for teachers and students filled up their containers even more, which means that it's harder for them to get to a really nice, cool baseline where they feel kind of neutral. They feel that homeostasis, that balance. So I definitely saw an issue in the beginning because that's just the nature of the work. But then I think it's gotten elevated, and I think it's harder for people to let down now.
When I talk to current educators on this show, or even beyond that, outside of here, it's, it seems, and I was a teacher for 14 years, and so I feel it deep in my soul when I talk to people about these issues, but it becomes and never goes away, this idea of this feeling that teachers have of rushing through every moment of their day. And when they take on more things, even small things, like as a day goes on or a week goes on, like the feeling of being overwhelmed begins to feel it's almost like that they expect that to be the normal. Yes, give me that. Sure, I can talk to this kid. Okay, add that meeting. And people, while they of course know that the feeling probably isn't right and they shouldn't feel that way, I think teachers have been almost trained to think that it's their job to be overwhelmed by like that is the job. Like you're going to have a lot to do, and there's always going to be more. And we know that. I mean, you could literally start working at 8 a.m. and not stop until 8 p.m. and still feel like there's more to do. And so as part of the work that you do, how much is also teaching people to let go of some of that, or is a lot of it in once they start to make a routine of regulation and awareness and presence, does it start to feel like a lot of what they're already trying to handle is manageable? Or maybe it's both.
Well, I think initially my first response is our brains become addicted to the state that we spend the most time in. So if you exist in a day-to-day that is activating, that where your nervous system has that sense of hypervigilance and readiness to respond and the expectation of workload, it's going to become addicted to that where it feels like that's normal and will seek it when it is not present because we're drawn to familiarity. It uses fewer brain resources. So we have to be careful about what we become accustomed to because you're right. The new normal isn't a good normal.
Right.
As animals, we are supposed to have a response and come back to a really parasympathetic, relaxed, calm, neutral state. And teachers don't get to visit or revisit that state very often throughout the day. So there is that piece of it. Then there's the piece of we are contagious. Our nervous systems are contagious. We change a room, whether it's our colleagues, our principal, or the children. We change the room when we enter it before we say anything because that's how transmissible it is. So a lot of the work I do is about helping teachers become aware of the state that they're operating in most of the time, and then identifying what would be a better state if they knew they were influencing the room. What would be a better state to go into that room with? So the awareness, learning how to be intentional about how you go into a room, and then some tools to help either bring your state down or bring your state up. Because the other part of it is if you're already in burnout, you're almost in that hypo state, that hypo, almost depressed, but kind of low energy. It's really hard to bring yourself up and out. So wherever you are, it's important to know on an hour-to-hour basis, what state am I in right now? What state do I really want to be in, or what state do I need to be in to do whatever this next period is, or to do what this next meeting is? And then learning how to manipulate your nervous system to get there. And then the lifestyle pieces, a lot of teachers find it refreshing to know that, like bubble baths and tea parties are not going to cut it. The self-care, just take care of yourself or do a yoga class, or it's not enough for this profession. So there is dramatic kind of lifestyle adjustments that need to be made outside of your work, and then finding ways to transition into it and being aware of how your state responds to each. And sometimes that means people are not in the right school, they're not in the right age range, they're not in the right environment, and they need to make changes because it's going to affect their health long term.
And so when you introduce, I'll ask you about any specifics that you're doing momentarily, but when you introduce this kind of these changes or routine or this kind of lifestyle that they would have to adopt, or even just talking about or introducing nervous system regulation in general, how much do you meet resistance from teachers? Do you feel like they don't necessarily think that it's going to work, or that how responsive are they to what you're trying to do before they start to feel the effects?
The resistance I get across the board from any profession usually comes from people that have been doing this so long that it's their entire identity. And it's very threatening to offer somebody an alternative to something they've created as their own identity. So if it's being a workaholic, if it's being an overthinker, if it's being someone with anxiety, if it's, whatever that piece of identity is, it becomes threatening to the nervous system to try and adjust it. So that's where I get the resistance from. Most people, they have an identity as a teacher in the classroom, but they also have other pieces of their life that they draw on that form the fullness of who they are. And they just have, that growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. They have an openness to try something new, and they know it's not going to be the end of the world if it works. And they know it's not going to be the end of doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's good to know. That leads to just my neck. I feel like I'm being way more question answer than I normally am today, but I'm so interested in little specifics about how people work with you, and how you work with them. But so that brings me to my next question, which is, how do you then branch into them helping their students? Or I'm assuming those that are also, if you're working with teachers and they're also parents, they might also be thinking about how they can apply this to their home life or to their own kids. So how does that bridge happen? You're working with educators first, and then are you teaching them methods to bring to a younger population or how to manage a classroom, or are you also then working with the kids with them?
I'm mostly working with the teachers, and then they bring those practices too. So when a teacher learns how to regulate their nervous system, which means they're checking in with their physical body, that's where you get the first cues of the state that you're in. And then we work to manipulate that state, which is, I'm feeling anxious today, and I know this because my breath is shallow and I have tension in my shoulders or I'm tight in my jaw. We just notice those physical cues, and we find another place in the body where things feel relatively more comfortable. Or we find a place where breath moves easily all by itself without trying to change it. We're just kind of sitting as a witness, and then something will shift. So if I say, where do you notice feeling support from the chair? Bringing awareness right to where the back of your legs meets the chair, getting a sense of the weight of just that space. I'm redirecting the brain to a place that isn't activated. And the brain doesn't care if it's real or imaginary, if it's past, present, or future. It will go where I tell it to go. And then when it goes to a place that feels comfortable and supported, it will change my biology. So as it changes their biology, I'll be able to see it. I'll see that their breath has changed. I'll see that their shoulders drop, and I'll bring awareness to that. What do you notice in the rest of your body by noticing how you feel in the chair? So it's just that body awareness piece that helps them go, oh, I'm charged up. Now I'm aware of that.
Right.
And this is how I can go into parasympathetic and regulate in a moment.
And so it seems like you are incorporating a lot of that sensory awareness.
It's all sensory.
Yeah.
The language of the nervous system is the felt sense. So we go there first. And then because the brain doesn't care past, present, or future, we can use imagination, memory, visualization to also increase regulation in the nervous system. And that's a piece that when they're working with children, they can help kids bring awareness to their breath. They can help kids feel their butt in the chair or feel their butt on a exercise ball, and kind of ground into their own body, feel their feet flat on the floor and wiggle their toes. Those techniques will help kids start to regulate, but you can also use imagination with them, especially because kids are so great at it.
Yeah.
In helping change their state. So if everybody's kind of like right before Christmas holidays and bouncing off the walls, you can play a game depending on the age of, let's imagine that we're sloths and we have to kind of move through mud, and this mud is really thick. And you can have them do it physically, but you can have them imagine it, and the imagination is the fastest route. When you move the body, it's secondary. It still has an impact, but you can connect the imagination of a sloth going through mud, and you'll physically be able to see their nervous systems adjust just by playing that game. So you can adjust it to whatever state that you need the room to be, and you can play with imagination or even memory. Like, do you remember when we did this assembly and what it was like to see this or to do that, or when we played this game and it was so exciting? You can wind people up or down according to what your needs are, based on helping their brain navigate through time, basically, and through their bodies.
So when we talk about the brain-body connection, is what you're saying the brain usually is what comes first, and where the movement is secondary, kind of.
Right. It's always better to notice breath because it's a function the body does all by itself.
Right.
Than it is to try and change the breathing. So you can have impact by both, but the most effective regulating system for all of us is our breath. Our body knows how to do it all by itself. We want to find a place where it does it perfectly all by itself and notice it. And then it will deepen and lengthen all on its own just by witnessing it, which is much faster than trying to remember the counts or the box breathing or some of these other things. Those can be effective also, but just noticing the breath and really paying attention to it goes into that part of the survival brain that regulates fastest.
Which is why the recognition of breath is typically the center of a good meditation system, right? We're noticing the breath, and then it literally brings you to your center, and you can lose yourself in that, just literally paying attention to or listening to your own breath. And you're right, it does deepen as you over time, as it, or lengthen, as you said. I'm also thinking like well, first of all, like, so say you were going to start tomorrow with a new group of teachers. I guess it could be anybody. What is the typical length that you like? What's the length of time that you work with people where that it takes for them to get to a place where they can kind of do this on their own, or they feel like they can build a routine comfortably? What does that look like?
And it depends on the person and what else, because it's really not what they're showing. It's not what's happening in the moment. It's what they're showing up with that they brought from the rest of their life.
Right.
So it's very individual. Some people who are relatively resilient and healthy, they have healthy practices, establishing joy and meaning outside of their work. They'll take a 1-hour session where there's a little bit of the education piece and the science behind this, and then there's a little bit of practice. And they'll go do it and notice a difference right away. Most people have what I would consider a breakthrough, where it's like, I practiced this or I did this, and 2 to 4 weeks in of doing this once a week, I noticed a huge shift. I noticed it started getting easier. I noticed I wasn't reactive to things I normally would react to, or that my reaction was a lot more diminished than it had been before. So they notice a sense of having a little more control over how they respond to things, but also a little more balance in how they perceive them.
I love that. I'm thinking about, my mind just kind of went in a few different directions when you were saying that, because I'm thinking about myself and the breakthroughs. I mean, when you do practice these things over, a long length of time, you have many breakthroughs that, as you reach different levels of awareness, which is one of the things we talk about the most on this show. And so my other question there is, what role does reflection, if any, play in this process when you're working with people? Do you have a reflection piece, whether it's written or mental or in a group or an individual, where people are thinking about what they feel and what they are bringing to the process and what they're getting out of it as they go along?
I don't bring in anything formal. It's part of the conversation where we talk about, how is this different than it was before, or what do you notice that's different than it was 3 weeks ago? The awareness piece, it's just being aware of, this is the state that I'm in and I have control over it. I can manipulate it. I can influence it. I can make it better on demand when I learn how to do these things. And that makes my family life better. It makes my work life better. It makes my classroom better. It's just this idea of having awareness of what's going on in your own body and being able to change it so that you feel like you have more, I don't want to use the word control in a bad way, but you have more control how you show up in your life in every way. So it never just impacts the classroom. It impacts your relationships, your coworkers, your family, because it becomes a part of you're changing your brain to give out energy and participate in a way that is has more space for you to respond appropriately, accordingly, and also recover really well.
Right. And then it becomes part of who you are. And that whole cycle of, that where recovery becomes a big part of it is now part of your life. And we, like you're mentioning the word control, I think we like to use management a lot. Like we'll say, are you able to manage your attention or your awareness, or because it can feel like, we don't want it to feel like we're saying you have to force something, but we do want you at the same time. You don't want to soften it too much, because we want you to realize that you do have some sort of power, even though it feels like often that it's so easy for that to be at a loss or completely.
And I think using soft words during critical times can do a disservice, because
I agree.
Sometimes we need to really be honest and raw about, this is the time in my life I need to be powerful. I am designed to have moments of powerful and victory and being in these hyper confident states. It's good for me to have this level of elevation and be able to come down. I think there's a risk in neutralizing things and softening them so much that we have, a little bit of a better day. And then, oh, we're fine. And then, oh, I'm a little sad, but no, I'm fine. And like life is big and the range is big. And so the goal is to increase our range so that I can have a really great day. And I can have a really crappy day and I can always recover. But there is a bigness to my life that is okay and something that I can accept and bring in and encourage and not have watered down.
I love that idea. I say that, I don't say it super often, but I think it more than I say it out loud, but calling and recognizing that potential for bigness in your life. And I think about when I want to apply any of this to the way you might think about managing a classroom and how important a piece it is in an especially in the younger grades, in an educator's life, to make sure students understand that the potential in any way that they possibly have. And what better way is there to increase that awareness for what you are capable of as one individual human, growing up in this world, than to increase your capacity to kind of regulate and manage these really difficult emotions, and not just emotions, but the things that happen to you or come at you from the outside that you likely cannot expect or understand, but you can be better prepared or ready to accept them.
And what better way to really model that? I think too, there's a focus on, there's so many students and there's all of this stuff, and I just need to manage the energy of this classroom and keep it in this narrow band. But what great way to model how life really works, in that you can get really big with enthusiasm and winning and whatever that looks like and excitement about things. And then you can teach them how to bring that back down to and this is how do we feel different in our bodies when we need to show empathy, or when somebody is sad, or when the kindness is needed, or when somebody has a headache and we have to be really quiet or mindful, or, to be able to explore states with kids in the classroom. They might not be getting it outside of it, depending on what's going on in their family life.
Right.
So to be able to know that we can explore and experience great joy at school as part of learning in our states. And then we can play with how to bring it down a notch and how to bring it down all the way to the bottom, and how to bring it, being able to model that and then teach it is something that encourages that expansiveness, that range, versus, the trying to keep them in a lower band or in a more manageable space. If they practice this, they're easier to bring into a calmer, more focused state, because they've had the chance to let some of it out. And they've also had the chance to learn, and it's building their brain about how to inhibit when it's appropriate and how to bring things down when you need to. That's essential for most stages of development that's in education right now, is to learn the value of all of that movement.
I love that. And I love, it really forces you as an adult or as the educator in the situation to really not fall into this, I guess, this path that can present itself where we do want to shade younger people from everything, maybe not everything, but the things that we feel like they are going to really struggle with emotionally. And that can be hard to not do, especially when you have 30 of them in one room looking to you for every sort of guidance, academic and otherwise. And so how do you, learning, that's why when you mention modeling, that's what I talk to people a lot about in my work, like modeling this and learning how to focus your attention, like even just bringing your attention to your body, like the simple things that you can do as an adult individual human to learn how to, then you don't even wind up thinking of it as modeling. I think over time it just becomes, this is how you walk the earth and other people. And
I'm going to go into this space and I'm going to be intentional. I'm going to be regulated. But today the goal is to bring joy into this space.
Mm-hmm.
And when was the last time I remember doing that so well? If we had a moment that we remembered earlier in our career where we felt joy in what we did, and we think about that right before we walk into the classroom, we start that process already without even doing any work.
Right. And it shouldn't be, you're making me think of one other thing there, like, because I remember doing this as a teacher too, like, it can't just be masking, like when you're in front of the classroom, masking that you're so busy and crazy and frazzled, and then like putting on this joyful look, because kids know that too. They will get that eventually. Like, you can't do that day after day after day and week after week without that coming through. It's not about like hiding the crazy part behind, like in your desk, and then teaching, and then going back to being crazy in between classes. It's about literally changing your whole system. And otherwise, you're not actually joyful. And then what?
Exactly.
It's not really bringing anything good to anybody to just be. It's not just putting on this happy face. It's actually changing your whole life. You're getting me excited because this is what I want people to experience. It's always so exciting when I talk about it with somebody like yourself. And that actually brings me to one more question. I know, like, I'm looking at the time here, and we need to start winding down. Now, this is what happens. Like, I get into the second half, or like the third part, and we start to get into a lot of topics that I wish I could explore, but we are running out of time. But I wanted to just ask a little bit about if you noticed that there is a role in any part of this work that you do that you have seen made more difficult by the existence of social media in people's life.
I think kids in general, their life becomes more about comparison to something that isn't real. And they already struggle more to differentiate what's real and what's not real. So I think social media has had huge impact. That being said, it's not going away.
Right.
So, how can we help kids learn what's real, what's not real, and create people and an existence for them that is more desirable to live in than what's through the screen. And I think that's a big challenge that needs probably a lot more attention in those developmental ages.
Yeah. And this is coming off of, I don't know how many people listening even, if everybody knows this yet, but coming off of just last week, we have renamed and rebranded the product that creates this whole inspiration for this podcast and all the work we do at the Optimalist. So we used to be called Focusable. That was our software. And now we've just renamed to Engageable. And with this idea that we have it's the same thing, and everything kind of works the same way that it did before, but we really are thinking deeply about this idea of engaging better with the life in front of us, and how we can use consistent practice of better attention to do so. So how can we use practicing better attention to give us that energy? We say it's the pulse of energy you need when you think about what it is that you have in front of you, and how you can be more engaged as a person rather than looking to other people and things to engage you. Like, what's the difference between being someone who is engageable and being someone who kind of is passively waiting to be engaged? And I think that's something that the now 10, 15 years of the prevalence of things like social media in our lives really has to teach us, right? We can't keep living outside of ourselves and doing a disservice. And that, to me, really hurts the nervous system. For me, it does.
It really numbs it out because it's not just passive, but it's giving chemical hits without a true experience. And so, I would love to see what brain imaging looks like, from age 3 to age 20, if somebody started right now, because I think it's going to look different. And I know that we already engage with others differently, and it becomes really easy to hide behind And so we don't feel the impact of things either. Negative things that we're supposed to feel the impact of, we don't, because they've become neutralized through the screen, and we don't have the positive impact either. So much work for parents and teachers and everybody in this world really needs to go into how can we create experiences in real life that are engaging and meaningful and lighting up the brain and creating positive connections and interactions the way that nature intended. That we're competing against.
Right. Well, like I said, I could now branch off into 5 other topics here in this conversation. I feel like that I've been so excited to have with you today, Tara. But speaking of real experiences, I think that's a perfect way to segue into the last section of this conversation. And I did want to give you a quick, few seconds space to maybe, if you want to speak directly to a lot of people listening to this podcast at this moment, this is episode 12, are educators and parents. And so maybe if you did want to give a quick tip or something that people could jumpstart this work on their own if they wanted to do it tomorrow, or even thinking of it's summer now for us all. So what can either a teacher or a parent do for themselves to over the summer? Really, if we're thinking of ourselves becoming a model and they want to work on themselves while they are away from the school space, what could we do tomorrow to get that started?
I think what's important especially for the summer, and I hadn't really considered it in terms of summer, but it's a good time to not just rest, but to engage in something new. The brain really loves to be a beginner and to work through something that you kind of suck at in the beginning. So you get the benefit of humility along with, kind of progress. And it lights up the brain. It gives it extra BDNF to fertilize the connections. It's really powerful against depression. It helps to regulate. It's a good, healthy distraction. I would say, think of something that you used to love to do that you have stopped doing for whatever reason over time and jump back into it. Or think of something that you've always wanted to do and never tried and start there. Get into new environments. Learn to get your brain activated for not the familiar, because it wants to stay in what's familiar, and
Yes.
we want to move it into growth. So look for things that are playful and are fun and that bring you joy and that are brand new, so that you're engaging in life in the way that you're supposed to engage in life, not just taking the rest. The rest in recovery is important, but you still want to make sure that when you're in a rest and recovery time, that you're looking for how to re-engage in your life outside of your work in ways that are going to light you up.
Right. And that everything is a cycle. We call things a cycle for a reason, right? We can't remain in one of these states for too long or forever. We have to learn how to recognize and be aware of when we move to the next one.
No, that's totally it. It is, we're in flow all the time. So you want to bring awareness to it, but you also want to make sure that you're moving yourself into that. If I'm going to be a model for how to live life in expansion, in the full range of what I was put here for, how am I starting to do that in the time off that I have, where it's not as challenging from a time pressure to do so?
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk a little bit about, as we wrap up, maybe what it is that you are taking into your brain these days, Tara, so we can get a little sense of the overall picture of who you are, outside, even maybe a little outside of this work. So if there's anything that you are reading or listening to or watching, any or all of those, we'd love to learn what it is that you're thinking about these days.
Sure. One book that my friend recommended that I'm loving is called Haggitude, and it is geared for women sort of middle age and up. Mm-hmm. But what is really beautiful about it is she brings in a lot of history and Celtic stories. Her storytelling is really, really so nice. And it's so honoring of women going through whatever we're going through in life. And so it's a book that has been delightful in how she uses, I'm listening to it actually. So it's her accent, kind of storytelling through women in history and different things. That's been really delightful. The other, because I'm trying to get away from all of the like business and education and self-focused books. So this was something lighter. What I'm watching is I just wrapped up Ted Lasso, who had a rough couple of
seasons I
in
agree.
There.
Yeah.
But the last one I thought was really nice. And what I love about the package of that is, and the story is, there was a lot of movement of emotions in addition to humor, in addition to kind of the best that we can bring to relationships. I thought it was so well done and refreshing, and it made me feel good. So I don't engage in things that don't make me feel good in my downtime. So.
No, I totally agree. I found it hard to engage with, to really care about Ted Lasso in the second season, but I do like how you just said the best we can bring to relationships, because that is the crux of what I have always liked about it from the beginning. Although I do think the storytelling was better in season 1, but yes, the relationships and how we treat each other and how we treat ourselves, I think, is the core of that show. Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
The lastly of something new. I mean, I've done a lot of new things in this year. One of the new things that I've done, and it makes me sound like an old lady, but this place I moved into has a lot of birds, and I put bird feeders up. And so I have a wider variety of birds visiting than I've ever noticed before. And now I want to identify them, and I'm listening to their sounds. So I'm being very present in nature. It's also something that my old dog and I used to do every morning. So now it's this ritual that I really love. So I'm not going out there. I don't have binoculars or a field guide yet, but like not full bird watcher,
but it's on your own property. So that's like such a great addition. That's easy to build into a routine. I totally get that. And that's funny that you mentioned that, because now I don't have this so much. I just moved myself. But where I used to live in Los Angeles, there was a park that I would hike with my dogs several times a week because it was so close. But while they were kind of running off leash, there's all these little trees and so many different birds out here than I was used to on the East Coast. And I just become obsessed with watching birds that I didn't grow up seeing, like all different colors. And so I think about that all the time because I'm not near a park like that right now. But I was in a cab in New York because I was in New York over the weekend. I was in a cab over the weekend, and or I was going to the airport, actually, and my driver was talking to me about where I was going and living in Los Angeles and being from New York. And there was a silence in the conversation, and out of nowhere, you would never expect this, he just goes, "How's the bird watching scene?" Isn't that so crazy? I was like, oh.
That is
I'm like, wow, you got the right passenger, because I can talk to you about LA birds and trees for the next 20 minutes if you want.
It's so funny. I think too, when I was in my practice and I was raising my kids, I was in nature, you know, like because I had to walk the dogs or do whatever. I wasn't really in it. I wasn't really in nature.
Right.
I wasn't really present. And so now that my, the kids have moved out and I'm kind of on my own just with now one dog, there is a different appreciation and more space to notice and really be in nature. And I'm noticing how grounding it is, how instantly regulating it is, how much in awe of it I am. And that the more I'm aware of, the more comes to me. So it is kind of this, it's almost spiritual what's happened in the last really few months in coming into this place of I can be present and grounded in a very different way just by being way more in nature and actually being able to sit in it, because I'm not so much frenzy of life like I used to have.
Yes. And I talk to people about using elements of nature, of your natural surroundings, like even just a short walk somewhere through anything, to using elements in nature to ground yourself to the life in front of you, to reality, and to work on your attention. Like literally, it could be watching or looking at things like birds, but even if you're in movement, like walking, as you walk, looking at the leaves as you pass and looking for the detail, looking at like
Absolutely.
the bark of a tree, like it really is when I do that every once in a while, it's kind of miraculous what like you were saying before, it changes your brain and your biology pretty quickly. You can feel it. But it really doing a little bit of that every day, I think it's like up to like 12 minutes a day really is all it takes to work on your attention to the point where it changes you.
Yeah, it's not much. And they found with women especially that a very short time in nature induced a really nice, quick parasympathetic response. So even just using that as medicine is valuable. And I know also when I'm in nature, there's a tendency to, instead of being focused down on a screen or on my desk or whatever, my head is up. And so I'm noticing the skyline. I'm noticing, if I'm traveling and I'm by the ocean, I'm noticing the vastness of everything else and how really small and relatively insignificant I am.
Right.
That does change my perception of my struggles or my challenges or my deficits or what I'm working on. The breadth of what's out here and what we're living in, that perspective shift is pretty instant if you let it be.
And then also to kind of end that thought, what that does in my mind, it also primes you for more and better connections with other people. When you are more grounded and connected to yourself.
Their nervous system will read you as being safe. If you're regulated, you don't come in front of people as with their animal brain thinking you're a predator. You're safe. So you instantly have reduced defenses and the ability to connect easier.
And I think that's a great way to end. I think this episode where we're trying to talk a little bit more about how, like in a practical way, teachers can think about being like working on their own regulation, being models of this for kids and how to work on it with them. But with the ultimate goal, I think that everybody wants to build a more manageable, connected community within the classroom and the school itself. And I'm always talking about how we need to work and start on an individual level first, no matter what it is that we're doing. So, Tara, where can people find you if they want to engage with you or connect with you or ask you any questions? Where would you welcome people connecting with you?
I would say right now the best place to go is probably braincoach.co. And they can also find me on Instagram at Tara Shrink.
And you are not a Twitter user, is what I have learned. That's where I live.
But you know what? It's funny that you mentioned that because this morning I'm like, I'm kind of tired of these other places. Maybe I'll go to Twitter. I retweeted something on Twitter and was like, maybe I'll come back to Twitter.
I think I found you there like a few months ago because I mostly interact with you through LinkedIn, where you post these beautiful things and I read them, almost all of them, like every day. They're so consistent. And they always align almost perfectly with what it is that I'm thinking or doing at the moment. And that's why I've been so insistent on having you on, because I know that what you're doing is going to speak to everything that we're doing and everything that our audience is looking to work on, and just hear more people talk about it in the way that you do. So,
and LinkedIn's a great place to find me too. I kind of give most of my thoughts or expertise on posts in LinkedIn more than anywhere else.
Yeah. And that's a great forum for it because you can write longer there. But yeah, this is a time when everyone's like thinking, should I jump off of Twitter? But Tara's going to be on it, everybody. So don't leave yet. Let's get her on there, interacting with us a little bit. But okay, cool. Well, I'm hoping that this conversation has inspired people to reach out, or I would love to. I always say sometimes, like when I have specific types of conversations, I'm always like, tweet out things that you like, or because a lot of the people that listen are also interacting on Twitter or Instagram in some way. So let us know what you liked or what you found useful in this conversation. If you did wind up trying something on your own or over the summer, whatever the case may be. And Tara, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. This has been really great to hear your voice and to be present with you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I hope you gained as much from listening to Tara as I did from speaking with her. From the beginning, the way she talks about grounding yourself and finding presence in your body through every emotion and experience is so important to reflect on regarding your own way of moving about the world. You can let us know what you think by leaving a comment on Substack, a review in Apple Podcasts, and you can reach me on Twitter at scandela9. You can listen and subscribe to the Optimalist podcast wherever you love listening to great podcasts. New episodes are released every Wednesday, and links to all of the resources here are available in the show notes. The Optimalist podcast is brought to you by Engageable, the only app that gives you the mindful pulse you need for better attention. And it's free. Create an account today at getengageable.com or by downloading Engageable on any iOS or Android device. You can also follow us at Get Engageable on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks for listening to The Optimalist. I'll be back next week with a new conversation. Stay engaged.